Welcome, dear subscribers and curious listeners of my channel. Book adaptations always suffer from the same flaw. Screenwriters smooth out the sharp edges, remove the darker sides of characters, and add a touch of romance. All so the audience keeps loving them. But precisely because of this, many iconic heroes on screen look far lighter and more convenient than they do in the books. That's exactly what happened with Severus Snape. In the films, he appears as a stern but noble professor. In the books, however, he is a complicated, contradictory, and far from pleasant man. Much like Tyrion Lannister from Game of Thrones, Snape was turned into an almost heroic figure in the movies, stripped of most of his flaws. Today I'll show you the sides of Snape that were left behind the scenes. Be prepared. The image of this beloved character may suddenly appear much darker. Number 1, a special attitude. Snape hated Harry even before the boy opened his mouth in their very first class. The reason was simple. Harry reminded him far too much of James Potter, Severus's school nemesis. In the films, this hostility was toned down, but in the books it took openly toxic forms. That first potions lesson immediately shows the difference. In the movie, Snape seems to be teaching a careless student a lesson. In the book, he simply lashes out at Harry for no reason. Even worse, he blamed Harry for Neville's failed potion, which was clearly not Harry's fault. Cruel, unfair, and absolutely uncalled for. And this happened constantly. In the books, Snape was always ready to see Harry as guilty, even when there was no proof at all. If in the films his dislike looked like cold detachment, in the original it often felt like personal revenge. Number 2, the worst memory. But Snape wasn't only petty, he was also deeply contradictory. His occlumency lessons are a striking example. In the books he really did try to teach Harry, praised him for progress, and even showed patience. None of that was in the films. Yes, it all ended in disaster when Harry broke into the Pensieve and saw the professor's humiliating past. But up until that moment, Snape was acting with complete seriousness, sincerely trying to protect the boy. The contrast with the adaptation is immense. On screen, we saw only the conflict, but not the effort Severus put in for Harry's sake. Number 3, the best teacher in the world. Snape was a brilliant wizard, a talented potioneer, and the inventor of spells, but as a teacher, he was dreadful. His methods often bordered on sadism. Neville Longbottom will forever be remembered as the perpetually miserable boy, and a large share of the blame lies with Snape. He openly mocked him, reduced him to tears, and once even threatened to kill Neville's toad if the potion wasn't brewed correctly. On top of that, there was the infamous moment when he threatened to poison Harry just to test an antidote brewed by the class. Yes, Snape was in control of the situation, but the very idea is terrifying. The myth of him being a strict but fair teacher crumbles quickly in the books. Number 4. Slytherin-style justice. Snape was always on his house's side. No matter how badly a Slytherin misbehaved, the professor either turned a blind eye or shifted the blame onto others. Gryffindors, meanwhile, were punished even for minor infractions. A classic case, Alicia Spinnet. 14 witnesses claimed she was hexed by a Slytherin player, yet Snape refused to listen, insisting that Alicia had probably hexed herself to grow eyebrows uncontrollably. It's no wonder that with such a judge, Slytherin kept winning the House Cup year after year. Number 5. Unpleasant little things. There are more moments the films preferred to conceal. It was Snape who told Slytherins that Lupin was a werewolf. In the movie, it looked like an accidental slip. He humiliated Hermione after Malfoy's curse disfigured her teeth, claiming he saw no difference in her appearance. She left the lesson in tears, It was Snape's own spell, Sectum Sempra, that accidentally cost George Weasley his ear. And yes, he himself called Lily a mudblood even when she tried to help him. All of this makes the image of Severus far less noble than the films would have us believe. Number 6. Alan Rickman. And yet, despite everything above, it is thanks to Alan Rickman that we remember Snape as such a magnetic, majestic figure. His calm fury, restrained elegance, and tragic depth in every gesture turned the character into a legend. Rickman almost rewrote Snape, stripping away some cruelty and adding nobility. The films gave us a Snape we want to believe in, even knowing what he was like in the books, and perhaps that's why he remains one of the most beloved characters of the entire saga. Number 7. Sectum Sempra and Dark Passions. The Half-Blood Prince's notebook was more than a study aid. It was a catalogue of dangerous experiments. On its pages, Snape had written spells of his own design, many of them cruel and violent. The most infamous was Sectum Sempra, a curse that sliced open its target as if struck by invisible blades. In The Half-Blood Prince, when Harry uses it on Draco Malfoy, the result is horrifying. Blood spurted from Malfoy's face and chest as though he had been slashed with an invisible sword. Rowling writes, "This is not a defensive trick, it is a weapon of war." The book makes it clear Snape created it. The film softens this truth, making it seem like an accidental discovery rather than the invention of a boy already steeped in the dark arts. The darker implication is what the films avoid. If a teenage Severus could invent magic like this, what path might he have taken without Dumbledore's intervention? His spells reveal a mind fascinated by power and suffering, not just by knowledge. The movie version shows a strict teacher with a tragic past. The books reveal someone who might easily have become a devoted Death Eater, not a double agent. This shadow makes his later choices far more complex because they were not inevitable acts of goodness. They were decisions made by a man who had already walked deep into darkness. Number 8. Humiliations of Neville. Snape's cruelty toward Neville Longbottom went far beyond sharp words. In The Prisoner of Azkaban, he forces Neville to test a potion on his pet toad, Trevor, threatening that if it is brewed incorrectly, the toad might die. "We'll feed it to your toad and see what happens," Snape sneers, while the entire class laughs at Neville's terror. It is not teaching. It is humiliation. Scenes like this show how Severus targeted Neville's insecurities, turning every lesson into a nightmare. The films reduce these moments to brief scoldings, but in the books they are relentless. The damage was lasting. Rowling reveals in The Order of the Phoenix that Neville's boggart, the embodiment of his greatest fear, takes the form of Snape, not Voldemort, not death, but his teacher. Later, when Harry helps him learn the Patronus charm, Neville fails repeatedly. The explanation is simple. His fear of Snape blocks the memory of happiness needed to conjure it. This detail shows the depth of the wound. Snape was not just a harsh professor. He became the reason Neville doubted himself for years. Number 9. Role in Dumbledore's fall. Snape's role in Dumbledore's death is darker in the books than in the films. He was not simply the reluctant hero who carried out a painful duty. He knew for months that Dumbledore was dying from the curse of Marvolo Gaunt's ring. He kept this secret from the rest of the Order of the Phoenix, moving silently as though he were guarding a condemned man. Rowling describes how Snape tried to contain the curse, but could only slow it. From that moment he became less a protector and more an executioner, waiting for the day when he would have to strike the final blow. The movies leave out the raw arguments between Snape and Dumbledore. In the Deathly Hallows, Snape explodes when Dumbledore reveals that Harry must die to defeat Voldemort. His words cut like a knife. You have kept him alive so that he can die at the proper moment. In that outburst we see his horror. He is not simply following orders, he is raging against the cruelty of the plan, against the idea that Harry is being raised like cattle for slaughter. This side of Snape, furious, morally torn, but still obedient, was almost erased from the screen. That obedience is what makes his role tragic. Snape recognizes the horror, yet he continues to serve. He poisons the tower scene with ambiguity. Is he saving Draco, sparing Dumbledore, or completing his own grim duty? In truth, he is doing all three. The films framed the killing as a single act of reluctant mercy. The books reveal it as the culmination of months of dread, secrecy, and complicity. Snape was not just forced into Dumbledore's fall, he became its architect. Number 10, his relationships with other professors. Snape's colleagues did not see him as a respected figure. In the books, Professor McGonagall often clashed with him, openly challenging his cruelty toward students. In the Goblet of Fire, when Harry and his friends return from the graveyard, Snape demands that they be punished. McGonagall snaps back, furious. Do you really think this is the moment to be making accusations, Severus? Their relationship was never one of quiet respect. It was a constant battle of methods and principles. Hagrid distrusted him even more. In the Chamber of Secrets, Hagrid tells Harry and Ron bluntly, "I don't trust that Snape, not as far as I could throw him." To Hagrid, Severus was sly, secretive, and far too interested in the dark arts. The half-giant never believed Snape was fighting for the right side, and his suspicion lingered long after Dumbledore vouched for him. That mistrust shows how fragile Snape's place in the staff truly was. Even Remus Lupin, perhaps the most polite of all, carried his old wounds. He remembered the schoolboy who exposed his condition as a werewolf and the bitter boy who could never let go of his hatred for James Potter. In The Prisoner of Azkaban, Snape is the one who tries to have Lupin sacked after his secret comes out. "This time you've gone too far, Severus," Dumbledore warns him, but Snape does not care. He wants Lupin gone. The films reduce these tensions to a minimum, but the books reveal Snape as a man, isolated even among supposed allies. Number 11, the ending without illusions. Snape's end in the book is one of the bleakest deaths in the series. Voldemort never trusted him and kills him in the Shrieking Shack with cold efficiency. Nagini strikes, and Snape collapses, blood spilling onto the floor. Rowling writes how his breath rattled as he clutched Harry, whispering with the last of his strength, "Look at me." Those words are haunting. They are not a hero's cry, but the plea of a broken man who wanted to see Lily's eyes one last time. It is a death without applause, without forgiveness, without anyone to recognize what he had endured. In the films, his final scene is softened into a moment of revelation. Harry receives his memories almost like a gift, a deliberate choice, but in the book, the act is messy and desperate. "Take it," Snape croaks, forcing Harry to collect the silvery threads of thought. It feels less like a noble offering and more like a man clawing for a way to be understood after death. Snape dies with his story untold, his loyalty unknown, his true motives hidden from everyone around him. The bitter truth is that no one mourns him. Students had hated him, professors distrusted him, the Order of the Phoenix never welcomed him. Dumbledore, the one man who valued him, had used him as a pawn in a dangerous game. Even Voldemort, who should have seen Snape as an ally, saw only a tool to be discarded. His death is not catharsis, but tragedy. He gave everything and received nothing. Only after his body lies cold does Harry learn the truth through the pensieve. And even then, the acknowledgement comes too late. When Harry later names his son Albus Severus, he calls him the bravest man I ever knew. But Snape never heard those words. He died believing he was hated, unwanted, and alone. The movies painted his death as redemption. The books remind us that it was, above all, a story of loneliness. Number 12, hidden envy of James. Snape's hatred of James Potter was never just about rivalry. It was envy that dug deep into his bones. James was everything Severus was not: popular, athletic, always surrounded by friends. Even teachers favoured him. And worst of all, James had the affection of Lily Evans, the one person Severus loved with all his heart. In the Order of the Phoenix, Harry sees his father's memory in the pensieve. James dangles Snape upside down, laughing, while the crowd of students cheers. Rowling writes that Snape's face was white with rage and humiliation. This is not just bullying, it is the destruction of a boy's pride in front of the girl he adored. That moment explains why Snape could never let go. Every time he looked at Harry, he saw James grinning back at him. The same messy hair, the same cocky expressions. To Snape, Harry's very existence was a cruel reminder that Lily had chosen James, not him. In the Philosopher's Stone, Snape's hostility begins immediately. Ah yes, Harry Potter, our new celebrity. It is not just sarcasm, it is the bitterness of a man who cannot forgive the son for the sins of the father. Even Dumbledore noticed how deep this envy ran. In the Deathly Hallows, Snape snarls at him, "You have been raising him like a pig for slaughter." The fury is not only about Harry's fate, it is about the unfairness of everything James represented. Snape spent his life in shadows, mocked and hated, while James lived brightly and left behind the boy who carried both his name and his face. Snape's every insult, every punishment, was laced with this wound that never healed. The films softened this pain into a cold dislike. But the books make it clear Severus Snape was a man trapped in the shadow of James Potter. He envied his rival's laughter, his friendships, his courage on the Quidditch pitch, and most of all, the love of Lily. That envy shaped him, hardened him, and poisoned his choices. It was not simple hate. It was the kind of jealousy that lingers for a lifetime, long after the rival himself is gone. Number 13, the mask of bravery. In the movies, Severus Snape looks almost unshakable. He rarely raises his voice. His face is calm, his movements precise. Even Lord Voldemort treats him with respect, as though he is the only Death Eater who cannot be broken. But the books reveal another truth. Beneath that calm mask is a man consumed by fear. Snape knows every second he stands before Voldemort that he could die with a flick of a wand. His survival is not because he is fearless, it is because he is clever enough to hide the terror raging inside him. One moment in Harry Potter and the Half-Blood Prince makes this clear. When Bellatrix Lestrange presses him to prove his loyalty, Snape keeps his composure, but Rowling writes how his eyes glittered strangely as he answers her questions. It is the glitter of someone who cannot show weakness. He knows Bellatrix wants him to fail. He knows she suspects him of treachery. Yet he continues the act, layer upon layer, because to falter for even a breath could expose everything. That is not the calm of a man without fear. It is the discipline of someone who feels it deeply but refuses to yield. Even with Dumbledore, Snape's fear breaks through the cracks. When they discuss the fate of Harry in the Deathly Hallows, Snape cannot contain his anger. "You have kept him alive so that he can die at the right moment," he shouts. Here, the mask slips. His voice is no longer smooth and controlled. It is raw, furious, terrified of what the truth means. In the movies, this scene is quiet, almost noble. In the book, it is violent proof that Snape lives in constant torment, trapped in a role he cannot escape. True courage is not the absence of fear. Snape embodies that truth more than anyone in the series. Every time he enters Voldemort's presence, every time he lies to a fellow Death Eater, every time he looks Harry in the eye, he acts despite the terror clawing at him. "The bravest man I ever knew," Harry would later call him. And that bravery does not come from being fearless. It comes from carrying fear like a weight and still moving forward. Snape's heroism is born from the battle he wages not only against Voldemort, but against his own dread. Number 14, the promise to Dumbledore. Severus Snape's story, as told in the pages of J.K. Rowling's books, was never meant to be a tale of simple heroism. It was a portrait of a man haunted by guilt, consumed by bitterness, and bound by a love that had turned into obsession after the death of Lily Evans. Yet the films, especially in their final chapters, stripped away much of this painful complexity. They left audiences with the image of a man who quietly carried out Dumbledore's final wishes, as if from a place of noble sacrifice. The truth, however, is far darker and far more tragic. Snape did not choose to protect Harry Potter out of kindness, nor out of loyalty to Dumbledore's grand vision, but solely because of the memory of Lily. This subtle but essential detail reveals the core of his motivations, and the omission in the films reshapes how entire generations perceive him. In the books, the central moment of Snape's pact with Dumbledore comes in Harry Potter and the Deathly Hallows. When Snape reveals his Patronus in Dumbledore's office, the spectral silver doe moves silently across the room, and Dumbledore whispers, almost in awe, "After all this time?" To which Snape replies with the most devastating single word in the series, "Always." This moment was never about Harry. It was not about Hogwarts. It was not even about Voldemort's downfall. It was the eternal, unhealed wound of Lily's death, a wound Snape could never allow to close. In that single word, the weight of years crashes down, showing that Snape's actions are rooted in the refusal to let go of a woman he had wronged and lost forever. The films, particularly Harry Potter and the Deathly Hallows, Part 2, reduce this complexity to a few tender flashbacks and a softened narrative. Alan Rickman's masterful performance brings humanity to the character, but the framing of the story makes Snape appear as though he had secretly embraced Harry as a surrogate son, protecting him out of quiet admiration. Nowhere is this distortion clearer than in the Tears and Memories sequence, where Harry collects Snape's thoughts and sees glimpses of Lily's childhood. In the book, these scenes emphasize Snape's guilt and obsession. In the film, they play more like a final revelation of his nobility, the sharp edge of his torment, the selfishness beneath. His vow fades behind the romanticized presentation. It is essential to recall that Snape never liked Harry. From their very first meeting in Harry Potter and the Philosopher's Stone, Snape's hostility is unrelenting. He mocks Harry's fame, insults his father's memory, and deducts house points with cruel delight. Rowling writes, "Snape looked as though someone had just insulted him deeply." Fame clearly isn't everything, making it clear that Snape's bitterness toward James Potter extends fully to James's son. This antagonism is consistent throughout the series. Snape protects Harry not because he values him, but because he sees Lily's eyes staring back at him in every glance. Dumbledore himself articulates this in Deathly Hallows, observing coldly, "You do not seek to protect the boy. You seek to protect yourself. You cannot bear that it should have all been for nothing. You have never loved the boy." This line, absent from the films, reveals the heart of the matter. Snape's promise was fueled by self-preservation through Lily's memory, not true love for Harry. The significance of Snape's Patronus being the same as Lily's cannot be overstated. It is not an emblem of devotion to Harry, but a constant reminder of the woman he lost. Rowling describes it as a doe shining white, and it passed across the office floor and out of sight. The imagery is mournful, ghostly, and unrelenting. It is Lily's presence that lingers, not Harry's worth that inspires. The films, however, frame this moment almost romantically, with swelling music and a sense of resolution. What should feel suffocating and tragic comes across as selfless and redemptive. The nuance of obsession and guilt is overshadowed by the temptation to present Snape as a secret savior. In reality, Snape's agreement with Dumbledore was less an act of loyalty and more a desperate bargain. He begged Dumbledore to hide the Potters, but when Lily died, he turned his grief into an oath to at least keep her son alive. "If you loved Lily Evans, if you truly loved her, then your way forward is clear," Dumbledore tells him. And Snape's response is reluctant, drenched in bitterness. He will protect the boy, but only for her sake. This reluctance is essential because it shows how little he cared for the wider world. The idea that Snape became a double agent for altruism is false. He acted because he could not endure the thought that Lily's sacrifice would be meaningless. That subtle line between guilt and love is the key to understanding Snape, yet it vanishes in the films. By downplaying Snape's cruelty, the films also reshape the moral weight of his character. In the books, he is relentless in his bullying. He mocks Neville Longbottom, humiliates Hermione Granger, and treats Harry with contempt at every turn. Rowling writes in Prisoner of Azkaban, "Snape was breathing hard. The hand that held his wand shook." "Control yourself, Severus," Dumbledore said firmly. This constant presence of anger reveals that Snape never transcends his bitterness. His moments of compassion are rare and indirect, buried beneath layers of hostility. Yet the films, needing to compress his arc, emphasize only the tenderness of his memories, leaving out the cruelty that defined him. Number 15, a true double agent. Severus Snape's story is one of those rare literary arcs that only grows darker and more layered the deeper one looks, and yet the film adaptations of Harry Potter sanded down many of the edges that made him truly terrifying, conflicted, and tragically alone. In the movies, he emerges as a reluctant hero with a single tragic love motivating him, but in the books, his role as a double agent is shown with far more danger, cruelty, and inner corrosion. His life was not one of noble sacrifice with clear moral boundaries, but a brutal and lonely existence where he balanced precariously on a knife's edge between Voldemort and Dumbledore, never able to show weakness and always prepared to be killed if the mask slipped even slightly. One of the first differences between the books and the films lies in the way Snape interacts with Voldemort's inner circle. In Harry Potter and the Half-Blood Prince, Rowling gives us chilling glimpses of Snape at the Malfoys' home, sitting in Voldemort's shadow where his every word is a test. Bellatrix Lestrange openly questions his loyalty, spitting accusations that he has avoided Azkaban, that he has not proven himself as others have. Snape does not counter her with heroic calm as the movies suggest. He responds with deadly precision, crafting lies mixed with truths, so convincing that even Bellatrix falters. His ability to deceive one of Voldemort's most fanatical followers demonstrates just how razor-thin his margin for error was. The sagas. Films rush through these dynamics, reducing them to an atmosphere of vague suspicion, but in the books, the tension is palpable. Every moment with the Death Eaters could have ended in torture or death if a word fell wrong. The task of a double agent was not simply to attend meetings and feed information selectively. Snape was compelled to carry out acts of genuine cruelty to maintain his cover, actions that would forever cement him as a figure of hatred at Hogwarts. He belittled students like Neville Longbottom with calculated venom, even though the boy's parents had been tortured into madness by Death Eaters. In one moment, in Prisoner of Azkaban, Snape sneers that Neville is witless and an idiot boy, words that cut deeply. While the films portray these outbursts as part of his harsh personality, the book suggests something more sinister. Snape knew he had to appear heartless to protect his disguise. To Voldemort's spies, a kindly or compassionate Severus would have been grounds for suspicion. Thus, he became the monster everyone hated, because the alternative was death and exposure. Snape's loyalty to Dumbledore was also more complex than the movies ever showed. Their relationship was built on secrecy and mutual mistrust, not on blind trust. Dumbledore himself admitted in the Deathly Hallows, I sometimes think we sought too soon." This cryptic remark reflects how little even Dumbledore could fully predict about Snape's path. In the films, Dumbledore seems to rely on Snape with serene confidence, but in the books the headmaster probes and questions testing Snape's limits constantly. Snape's agreement to kill Dumbledore was not a symbolic gesture of love for Lily. It was a calculated move to protect Draco Malfoy from becoming a murderer, to maintain his standing in Voldemort's eyes, and to allow Dumbledore to die on his own terms. The layered cruelty of this arrangement, where Snape had to live with the eternal hatred of the Order of the Phoenix after Dumbledore's death, underscores the torment of his role. The most harrowing aspect of Snape's double life is the utter solitude that came with it. He had no allies, no confidants, no friends who could offer him comfort. Harry despised him, Sirius loathed him, and even his supposed colleagues in the Death Eaters never fully trusted him. This isolation is portrayed vividly in the books. Snape retreats to his private chambers, shutting the world out, clinging only to memories of Lily Evans to remind himself why he endures this endless torment. Rowling captures this when she reveals Snape's Patronus, the Silver Doe, in one of the most haunting scenes of the series. The Patronus is not a romantic flourish, as the films suggest, but a heartbreaking revelation of how completely he has bound his life to a love that would never be returned, a love that has become a chain and a curse. Snape's encounters with Harry also reveal the brutal calculations behind his choices. In the films, the animosity is softened, but in the books, Snape goes out of his way to make Harry's life miserable. He mocks him, sabotages him, and seems to delight in humiliating him. Yet beneath this cruelty is a hidden purpose. By making Harry hate him, Snape shields the boy from suspicion. Voldemort would never believe a man who despised Harry Potter so openly could be his protector. In Order of the Phoenix, when Snape deliberately belittles Harry during occlumency lessons, refusing to show patience, it is not only because of Snape's hatred, but because he cannot afford to expose himself. The coldness keeps Harry at a distance, ensuring that no Death Eater who overhears would suspect the truth. Number 16. Love and hatred toward Harry. Severus Snape has always been one of the most debated figures in the Harry Potter universe, and yet the way he was portrayed in the films removed much of the contradiction that made him one of the most complex characters in the books. On screen, Alan Rickman's performance gave Snape gravitas, mystery, and authority, but the deeper torment written by J.K. Rowling, the endless battle between his love for Lily Evans and his hatred for James Potter, was softened until it nearly disappeared. In the books, every insult he throws at Harry is laced with the bitterness of a man who cannot forgive the son for carrying the face of the father, while every act of protection is an echo of the devotion he can never let go. This inner war, which Rowling carefully built through 7 volumes, becomes a flattened shadow in the cinematic version, where Snape is rendered mostly as a cold teacher with a secret heart. One of the clearest examples of this erasure lies in Snape's very first appearance. In the book Harry Potter and the Philosopher's Stone, Snape's disdain is immediate as he quizzes Harry with difficult questions during his first potions lesson. What would I get if I added powdered root of asphodel to an infusion of wormwood? His sharp words are not mere discipline, but a calculated attempt to humiliate Harry for resembling James. Rowling describes how Snape's eyes glittered like cold black stones as he looks at the boy. In the film, this moment is transformed into a theatrical scene of intimidation, but without the context of personal hatred. The bitterness that comes from old wounds is absent, replaced with a generic sense of menace. Viewers are left thinking Snape simply dislikes Harry, rather than understanding that every glance is poisoned by memory. Throughout the books, Rowling shows Snape's cruelty not as random, but as deeply personal. He calls Harry our new celebrity with sarcastic venom, punishes him disproportionately, and often takes points from Gryffindor without cause. But beneath this unfairness lies an important contradiction. Snape constantly saves Harry's life. In The Philosopher's Stone, it is Snape, not Quirrell, who counteracts the curse on Harry's broomstick during the Quidditch match. Harry himself misunderstands the scene, believing Snape is trying to harm him, when in fact Snape is muttering counter-curses. The film simplifies this sequence, making it a background moment quickly overshadowed by Hermione setting fire to Snape's robes. The tragic irony that Harry despises the very man who saved him because Snape hides his motives out of pride and pain is almost entirely lost. This conflict becomes sharper in Harry Potter and the Prisoner of Azkaban. In the book, Snape's loathing for Harry intensifies as Sirius Black escapes Azkaban. Snape is haunted by memories of his torment at the hands of the Marauders, particularly James, and sees Harry as the living reminder of that humiliation. Yet when Harry, Ron, and Hermione nearly die at the hands of Lupin, transformed into a werewolf, it is Snape who shields the children with his body, placing himself between them and danger. Rowling writes that Snape flung out his arms to protect them, a line that underlines his instinctive devotion to Lily's son, even while he outwardly denies it. In the film, this moment is reduced to a brief gesture, without the emotional weight of Snape's history. The layering of hatred and love, pride and sacrifice vanishes in favor of a fleeting act of bravery. Perhaps the most painful example of Snape's duality is in Harry Potter and the Order of the Phoenix. In the book, Harry uses occlumency lessons with Snape to block Voldemort from entering his mind. These lessons are brutal because Snape treats Harry with disdain, hurling insults and showing no patience. But the real complexity emerges when Harry stumbles into Snape's memories and witnesses the infamous scene by the lake where James bullies Severus. The description is vivid. James levitates Snape upside down, exposing him to ridicule. Lily intervenes, but Snape, humiliated, lashes out at her with the cruel word mudblood. This memory explains decades of bitterness, the root of his hatred for James and the poisoned mixture of shame and love that colours every interaction with Harry. The films show a fragment of this but cut much of the detail that would allow viewers to feel the depth of Snape's wounds. Without context, Snape becomes a strict teacher rather than a man shaped by trauma and regret. The books insist again and again that Snape's feelings for Harry are not binary. He despises Harry's arrogance, which mirrors James, yet he protects him because he cannot bear the thought of Lily's son dying. This contradiction reaches its peak in Harry Potter and the Half-Blood Prince. Snape's protection becomes literal when he makes the unbreakable vow with Narcissa Malfoy, swearing to protect Draco and ultimately to kill Dumbledore if Draco cannot. Dumbledore himself insists, "Severus, you must kill me." For the reader, this is the culmination of years of conflicting loyalties. He is the man who will commit murder to spare Draco's soul, but also the man who secretly continues to safeguard Harry. In the film, the scene of Dumbledore's death is powerful, but the tension of Snape's inner conflict is understated. His agony, his reluctance, his private torment is not explored, leaving audiences with a simplified view of Snape as merely following orders. Number 17. Contempt for students. Severus Snape on the movie screen often appears as a dark, enigmatic figure who rules his classroom with icy authority, but rarely goes beyond the boundaries of professionalism. He intimidates, he demands silence, and he pierces students with his famous cold glare. Yet beneath the cinematic image lies a softened version of the man J.K. Rowling originally created in her books. The Snape of the written page is not merely strict, he is openly cruel. He takes delight in humiliating students, ridiculing their efforts and lashing out with barbed comments that leave lasting marks. The difference is not trivial. It shapes how generations of readers and viewers perceive the professor's legacy, turning a deeply flawed, bitter man into something closer to a misunderstood disciplinarian. When reading the first book, Harry Potter and the Philosopher's Stone, it becomes clear from Harry's very first potions lesson that Snape's disdain for his pupils is not hidden. The moment Harry steps into the dungeon, he becomes a target. Snape ignores Hermione's desperate raised hand, mocks Harry for his fame, and sneers at the class's attempts to follow instructions. The hostility is so blatant that Harry feels singled out from the start. "Clearly fame isn't everything," Snape says with venom. Setting the tone for years of classroom misery. This is not the firm but fair teacher of the films. This is a man who cultivates fear and who uses his position to belittle children barely 11 years old. One of the starkest contrasts between book and film is seen in the treatment of Hermione Granger. In the movies, Snape mostly rolls his eyes at her eagerness or cuts her off curtly. But in the books, his contempt is brutal and personal. In Harry Potter and the Prisoner of Azkaban, when Hermione answers a question in potions, Snape sneers, "I see no difference," dismissing her completely, even though her answer is correct. At another moment, when her teeth are magically enlarged by Draco Malfoy's spell, Snape looks at her and tells her coldly, "I see no difference," mocking her. Appearance in front of everyone. The cruelty of this remark is not softened in the text. It wounds Hermione so deeply that she bursts into tears. Such verbal assaults are stripped away in the films, leaving audiences with only fragments of his disdain, never the full picture of his malice. Neville Longbottom suffers even more under Snape's hand. In the books, Neville's very existence seems to irritate him. When Neville's potions go wrong, Snape does not correct him with patience. Instead, he delivers savage insults. In Harry Potter and the Prisoner of Azkaban, he threatens to feed Neville's pet toad, Trevor, a poisonous potion, unless Neville gets everything right. "If you don't get this right, boy, I shall feed you to your toad," he says, using fear as a weapon. For a shy and insecure child, these words are devastating. Neville trembles through potions lessons, not because the subject is difficult, but because his teacher delights in making him feel worthless. In contrast, the films only show Neville fumbling nervously, while Snape's bullying is watered down into a few sarcastic comments. The injustice of Snape's favoritism towards Slytherins is also painted more vividly in the books. He consistently awards points to Draco Malfoy and his friends for the smallest accomplishments, while docking points from Gryffindors for imagined slights. In Harry Potter and the Chamber of Secrets, when Hermione correctly brews a potion, Snape gives the credit to Draco. This one-sidedness poisons the classroom atmosphere, creating an environment where fairness is absent, and humiliation is a daily reality. In the films, however, this favoritism is barely shown, and Snape's relationship with Draco appears distant rather than complicit. The selective editing strips away the venom of Snape's teaching style. The books make clear that Snape's disdain is not confined to individuals. His contempt blankets entire groups of students. He refers to them collectively as dunderheads, mocks their intelligence, and uses sarcasm as his primary teaching tool. In Harry Potter and the Order of the Phoenix, during a potions lesson, he cuts across the classroom with the words, "You don't want to end up in here like Longbottom, do you?" reducing a boy's struggles into a cautionary tale of failure. This kind of remark shows not just frustration, but a deep-seated desire to belittle and control. Such language fosters fear and shame, not learning. The films, however, depict his lessons as tense but professional, omitting these personal attacks that reveal the true darkness of his character. Even Harry, the supposed center of Snape's ire, experiences a toned-down version of hostility in the films. In the books, Snape calls him arrogant, lazy, and unworthy. He seizes every chance to humiliate him, making pointed references to James Potter's behavior, dragging family history into the classroom. In The Goblet of Fire, when Harry's name comes out of the goblet, Snape mutters that fame and arrogance run in the blood. He never allows Harry a moment of dignity, reminding him at every turn that he is seen not as a student, but as an extension of his hated father. The films prefer to present this as icy sarcasm, but the relentless pettiness of the books is missing, giving viewers a softened impression. The sharpest edge of Snape's contempt emerges when he turns his sarcasm into weaponized shame. In Harry Potter and the Half-Blood Prince, when Ron struggles with his potion, Snape sneers, "Weasley, you will always be mediocre." This is not a correction. This is a prophecy of failure, a cruel brand stamped upon a teenager's self-worth. Such scenes barely exist in the films, where Ron's clumsiness is played for humor and Snape's comments are left vague. But in the books, these words linger, shaping how the students perceive themselves and how they remember their years at Hogwarts. For many, Snape was not just a teacher, but a tormentor. The difference matters because Rowling's narrative frames Snape as a deeply conflicted man whose cruelty cannot be excused by his later acts of bravery. His contempt for students is central to understanding his bitterness, his inability to let go of the past, and his failure to separate personal grudges from professional duty. By softening this element in the films, Snape's complexity is reduced. He becomes mysterious and intimidating rather than genuinely toxic. The screen leaves audiences with the impression of a stern disciplinarian, while the text reveals a man so scarred that he inflicts his wounds upon children. Hermione, Neville, Ron, and Harry are not the only ones scarred by Snape's contempt. The entire Gryffindor class experiences it. His mocking tone echoes in the dungeon corridors, a constant reminder of how unsafe learning can feel. In The Order of the Phoenix, he tells the class, "You are hopeless at this subject, a sweeping dismissal that crushes every student present." Such blanket statements convey his disdain not for individual mistakes, but for the very existence of pupils he considers beneath him. The absence of this tone in the films creates a distortion, protecting Snape's cinematic image from the worst of his own venom. To some readers, this cruelty underscores Snape's tragedy. His inability to rise above his bitterness defines him. He cannot see children as innocent learners. He sees them as reminders of past humiliations, as echoes of James Potter's laughter, as symbols of everything denied to him. But that is precisely why his character resonates in the books. He is human, broken, flawed, and unable to be the hero that the films subtly nudge him toward. Stripped of his contempt, his role loses much of its edge, leaving only the shadow of the man Rowling envisioned. The tension between book and film grows sharper when we consider Snape's eventual redemption. In the books, his sacrifice is powerful precisely because it comes from a man so deeply flawed, so mired in bitterness that choosing love and loyalty carries enormous weight. To sanitize his cruelty is to weaken the contrast. His redemption feels less remarkable on screen because his sins are not as grave. The narrative loses its raw edge, and audiences are denied the full arc of a man who was both villain and protector, both tormentor and savior. It is perhaps fitting that the films chose to emphasize Snape's enigmatic aura rather than his cruelty. Alan Rickman's masterful performance thrived on subtlety, on quiet menace rather than overt ridicule. But in the process, the essence of Rowling's Snape was reshaped. Viewers who never read the books may leave with the impression of a misunderstood teacher, not the bitter, vindictive man who made generations of students tremble in fear. The cinematic Snape is haunting, but he is not complete. The books remind us that Hogwarts was not always a safe haven. For many students, Snape's classroom was a dungeon of humiliation, a place where fear stifled curiosity and where contempt poisoned knowledge. By ignoring this in the films, the story shifts. Snape's tragedy is softened, his cruelty erased, and his legacy altered. The contempt that defined his teaching becomes a footnote, when in truth it was the very essence of the man. Number 18, the moral problem. Severus Snape remains one of the most enigmatic figures in the Harry Potter saga, and while the films offered a visually striking version of him, they also simplified his morality into something almost romantic. The novels, however, make clear that Snape's morality is murky, filled with choices that were selfish as often as they were noble. The cinematic Snape, played brilliantly by Alan Rickman, became a mysterious guardian who acted out of hidden love. The literary Snape was harsher, more venomous, and far more compromised. This difference matters because the question of whether Snape was a good man or simply a guilty one haunted the books until the very end. In the novels, Rowling deliberately strips away the idea of Snape as a conventional hero. She paints him instead as a man marked by bitterness, prejudice, and cruelty, whose one redeeming quality is not a broad love for humanity, but an obsessive devotion to a single person. Lily Evans. When Dumbledore presses him in Harry Potter and the Deathly Hallows, Snape conjures a silver doe Patronus and whispers the famous word, always. In the films, this is played as a testament to eternal love, nearly saintly in its resonance. Yet in the book, the context is grimmer. Dumbledore himself is startled by the intensity and narrowness of Snape's devotion, asking incredulously, "After all this time?" Or the word always is haunting precisely because it speaks not to a broad moral awakening, but to a lifelong obsession rooted in regret. Snape's youth is another area where the films underplay the darkness. In The Order of the Phoenix, Harry dives into Snape's memories during occlumency lessons and sees the young boy bullied by James Potter. The films capture that humiliation but skip over the deeper truth revealed in The Half-Blood Prince. Snape was already fascinated with the dark arts, already calling Lily's friends mudbloods, already sliding toward a world where Voldemort's ideology made sense to him. In the book, Lily breaks her friendship with him after he uses that slur in anger, showing that Snape's choices, not just James's bullying, defined his path. By omitting the broader context, the films leave audiences with the impression that Snape was only a victim who turned tragic. The books insist he was also a willing participant in darkness. The morality of his role as a teacher is equally clouded in the novels, more than the films dare to reveal. In The Philosopher's Stone, he humiliates Harry for failing to answer a question about bezoars, a moment that sets the tone for years of cruelty. Throughout the series, Snape singles out Neville Longbottom for ridicule, going so far as to say, in Prisoner of Azkaban, that it would be an improvement if the boy's toad died. This was not the behavior of a man secretly good, but of a man whose grudges and bitterness found daily outlets. The movies condense these interactions, keeping only flashes of sarcasm that appear. Stern rather than vicious, thus smoothing away the rawness of his cruelty. This change distorts the reader's moral puzzle into something closer to admiration. Even Snape's defection from Voldemort is far more morally ambiguous in the novels than the films allow. His decision to switch allegiance comes not from disgust at the Dark Lord's ideology, but from fear and guilt when Lily is targeted. In The Deathly Hallows, Dumbledore makes this brutally clear, asking, "You disgust me. You do not care about the death of her husband or her child either. Only what it will mean for you if you lose Lily." This moment is absent from the films, which emphasize Snape's hidden sacrifices but not his original selfishness. By erasing Dumbledore's condemnation, the movies turn Snape's motives into love-driven heroism instead of desperate repentance. There is also the question of how Snape treated Harry himself. The films frame their relationship as antagonistic, but strangely respectful, a tension between a strict teacher and a reckless student. The books are more damning. Snape constantly insults Harry's father, mocks his flying skills, and tries to humiliate him in front of classmates. When Sirius Black's life is in danger in the Order of the Phoenix, Snape withholds information out of spite, forcing Harry into a reckless decision. His treatment of Harry is not tempered by compassion, but only occasionally restrained by duty. The films soften this relationship, making Snape appear as though he is simply testing Harry or shaping him harshly for survival, which aligns too neatly with the image of a misunderstood mentor. The story of Neville Longbottom's boggart in The Prisoner of Azkaban is perhaps the most striking example of how Snape's cruelty reveals his moral flaws. In the novel, Neville fears Snape so deeply that his boggart transforms into the potion's master. When Lupin encourages Neville to dress the boggart in his grandmother's clothes, the result is comic, but it also underscores the terror a child feels towards Snape. The films show the scene but reduce the emotional weight, playing it for humor. In the book, it remains a disturbing reminder that Snape's presence was one of Neville's greatest traumas. A good man, even a strict one, does not inspire such fear in children. Snape's moral compromises also extend to his relationships with other professors. His interactions with Lupin in The Prisoner of Azkaban are filled with contempt, driven not only by old-school rivalries but by prejudice against werewolves. He repeatedly undermines Lupin's lessons, and when Lupin's condition is revealed, Snape seizes the chance to expose him. The films present this tension briefly, but without the poisonous edge of bigotry that is present in the text. Rowling makes Snape's actions part of a larger commentary on prejudice and cruelty, while the adaptations gloss over this thread in favour of preserving Snape's aura of tragic depth. Even in his service to Dumbledore, Snape's morality is never straightforward. His promise to protect Harry stems from his promise to protect Lily's memory, not from any sense of duty toward the boy himself. When Dumbledore asks him to protect Draco Malfoy in The Half-Blood Prince, Snape accepts the task, but only grudgingly, more as a consequence of a binding vow than a personal conviction. His role in Dumbledore's death, carried out on the Astronomy Tower, is a calculated act of obedience, not an independent choice toward greater good. The films dramatize this moment as tragic heroism, but the book reveals how coldly Snape follows through on a plan devised by another. Rowling also shows that Snape never fully abandoned the bitterness that drove his life. His hatred of James Potter is relentless, resurfacing in every insult he hurls at Harry. His resentment towards Sirius Black never softens, even when they are nominally on the same side. These grudges underline a personality that clings to anger, not one that grows into wisdom. The films reduce these complexities, giving Rickman's Snape a weary dignity that suggests a man above petty rivalries, when in truth, the literary Snape never transcended them. The danger in romanticizing Snape is that it shifts the story's moral center. The books ask readers to wrestle with the idea that a man can be both cruel and brave, selfish and loyal, embittered and sacrificial. By contrast, the films simplify him into a tragic hero whose flaws are softened by noble music and camera work. When Harry calls Snape the bravest man I ever knew in the epilogue, it resonates differently in the books because readers understand the full weight of contradiction. The film set up that line as the culmination of a redemptive arc, but Rowling intended it as a paradox that resists easy answers. The lesson of Snape's morality in the books lies not in the discovery of hidden heroism, but in the acceptance of human complexity. His bravery is undeniable. He risked his life countless times as a double agent. But his cruelty is equally undeniable. He scarred children with words and wielded power with malice. The films invite audiences to admire him. The books invite readers to question him. This tension is at the heart of his character, and its absence in the films leaves the cinematic Snape incomplete. Snape's tragedy is precisely that he is not easily classified. He is not Voldemort, consumed entirely by evil, nor is he Dumbledore, striving for wisdom even through mistakes. He is a man who chose darkness, who clung to it too long, and who sought redemption not for the world but for one woman he could never have. In the novels, this makes him a figure of sorrow and warning. In the films, it makes him a martyr. The difference between those portrayals changes the way we remember him, and it changes the moral lesson his story was meant to teach. In the end, Snape's moral puzzle is what makes him unforgettable. The films gave audiences a character shrouded in mystery and devotion, but the books gave readers a man caught between cruelty and courage, whose every act of bravery was shadowed by selfishness. The truth lies not in simplifying him into good or bad, but in confronting the uncomfortable possibility that he was both. To erase that is to erase the very heart of Severus Snape. Number 19, his attitude toward Hermione. Severus Snape in the films is a figure shrouded in menace, yet carefully curated to maintain a sense of mystery rather than cruelty. His interactions with Hermione Granger are minimized to the point of invisibility, reduced almost entirely to cold glances and the occasional reprimand. On screen, she is simply the diligent Gryffindor who exceeds expectations in potions, while Snape remains the dour professor who refuses to reward her efforts. But in the books, J.K. Rowling paints a far harsher portrait, where Snape goes beyond mere indifference and slides into open contempt. The girl who should have been his pride as a teacher becomes his target, mocked for her intellect and ridiculed in ways that leave lasting marks on the reader's memory. The first shocking contrast lies in the way Snape addresses Hermione's intelligence. In the films, we only see him snap curtly when she raises her hand too eagerly, silencing her enthusiasm with an annoyed, "Thank you, Miss Granger, that will do." Yet in the books, his scorn cuts deeper. In Harry Potter and the Philosopher's Stone, when Hermione attempts to answer a question correctly, Snape sneers at her eagerness, remarking, "Know it all, aren't you?" These words, directed at an 11-year-old, do more than dismiss her answer. They demean her character, reducing her efforts to arrogance. It is not just irritation, it is humiliation in front of her peers in her very first year at Hogwarts. This thread continues across the series, shaping Hermione's place in Snape's classroom. In Harry Potter and the Prisoner of Azkaban, when Malfoy mocks Hermione by calling her a filthy little mudblood, Snape pointedly refuses to intervene. Instead of defending his student from such vile language, he coldly tells her to stop making a fuss. His silence and inaction are louder than any insult, communicating to the class that her pain is beneath his notice. This silence, this refusal to protect her dignity, stands in stark contrast to the cinematic Snape, who never appears complicit in Draco's slurs. The omission is telling. In film, his cruelty is softened to maintain the aura of an ambiguous anti-hero, but the books show the darkness beneath. Perhaps the most infamous moment comes in Harry Potter and the Prisoner of Azkaban, when Hermione's appearance becomes a weapon for Snape's ridicule. After an incident with Draco Malfoy leaves Hermione's teeth magically enlarged, Snape tells her dismissively that he sees no difference. The line is brutal in its cruelty. It is not only an insult about her looks, but a teacher's endorsement of bullying delivered with icy precision. It diminishes Hermione, already shaken and embarrassed, into silence. No scene like this exists in the films. Instead, the visual storytelling avoids any direct attack on her appearance. This choice erases one of the most damning aspects of Snape's character, his willingness to tear down a child's self-esteem with words that cut deeper than hexes. The paradox of Snape's attitude toward Hermione is that she embodies the very qualities he should admire. She is diligent, disciplined, and excels in his subject. Potions requires meticulous preparation, patience, and exact attention to detail, and Hermione thrives in this environment. In Harry Potter and the Half-Blood Prince, she consistently brews successful potions using the standard instructions, performing far better than most of her classmates. Yet rather than commend her, Snape ignores her skill, showering praise instead on Harry, who cheats with the annotations of the Half-Blood Prince. The irony is biting. Hermione's true effort is dismissed, while Harry's dishonesty earns approval. The lesson Snape teaches is not one of discipline, but of favoritism, undermining the very integrity of his subject. In film, this dynamic is muted, almost erased. The sixth movie portrays Harry's sudden success in potions as a source of amusement, with Hermione shown sulking in the background, her frustration played for humor. The gravity of Snape's injustice, the cruelty of dismissing a student's genuine talent, is lost. What the audience sees is a quirky classroom competition. What the books reveal is a teacher who deliberately withholds recognition from the student who deserves it most, perpetuating a pattern of belittling that spans years. Hermione's pain is not only academic, but emotional. In Harry Potter and the Goblet of Fire, when Hermione is ostracized by her peers due to Rita Skeeter's smear articles, Snape seizes the chance to humiliate her further. During a potions lesson, he cruelly suggests that Harry and Ron should partner with Miss Granger, the celebrated champion's girlfriend. His tone drips with sarcasm, turning her personal embarrassment into a classroom spectacle. It is not just bullying from a peer, but public shaming orchestrated by the very figure tasked with protecting her. This reveals Snape not merely as a stern professor, but as someone who exploits vulnerabilities to assert control. Even in moments when Snape's intelligence could have allowed him to recognize Hermione's value, he remains blind. In Harry Potter and the Order of the Phoenix, when Hermione plays a central role in forming Dumbledore's army, Snape later dismisses her accomplishments entirely, sneering at her leadership. It is telling that Dolores Umbridge, a character written as tyrannical and malicious, recognizes Hermione's talent for organization and manipulation more than Snape ever does. The comparison is staggering. The cruel High Inquisitor shows grudging respect where the supposed double agent, himself devoted to precision and knowledge, refuses to give any acknowledgement. The root of this disdain can be traced to Snape's own bitterness. Hermione reminds him of what he once was, a brilliant student who turned knowledge into power. But unlike young Severus, Hermione uses her intellect for the good of others, never hiding behind shadows or vengeance. This reflection becomes unbearable for him. Rather than mentor her, he punishes her for being a mirror of what he lost. The books show this tension vividly, embedding it into every snide remark and every withheld point. The films, however, avoid this uncomfortable truth, reducing Hermione's relationship with Snape to a faint outline without depth. The erasure in the cinematic adaptation does more than soften Snape's image. It also reshapes Hermione's story. On screen, she is spared the humiliation of a trusted authority figure mocking her identity, sparing audiences from the sting of betrayal. But in the books, this betrayal shapes her resilience. She does not crumble under Snape's disdain. Instead, she continues to excel, continues to raise her hand, continues to fight for respect she knows she deserves. By stripping away Snape's cruelty, the films also strip away a crucial layer of Hermione's strength, her ability to thrive in spite of a teacher who sought to belittle her. The irony is that Snape, for all his cruelty, helps sharpen Hermione's defiance. Every time he calls her a know-it-all, she responds by knowing even more. Every time he denies her credit, she seeks it in the eyes of those who matter: Harry, Ron, McGonagall, Dumbledore. The Hermione of the books becomes more than the studious girl. She becomes the young woman who learns that authority does not always mean fairness, and that true worth is measured by perseverance, not praise. This growth, however, is largely invisible in the films, which present her as naturally brilliant without the shadows of derision that tested her resilience. Another striking absence in the movies is the moral weight of Snape's favoritism. By consistently shielding Draco Malfoy and ridiculing Hermione, he enforces the very prejudices that the story condemns. His silence during Draco's use of mudblood, his insults about Hermione's teeth, his refusal to value her achievements, all of these actions align him closer to the ideology of the Death Eaters than to the resistance he supposedly supports. The films, intent on maintaining his eventual redemption arc, erase these contradictions. Yet it is precisely these contradictions that make Snape so complex, a man torn between loyalty to Dumbledore and bitterness that leads him to wound children. Snape's cruelty toward Hermione also reshapes how readers interpret his supposed redemption. When Harry later names his son after Severus, the gesture feels fraught because the books remind us of his flaws. He was not merely the misunderstood double agent, but also the man who called a child an insufferable know-it-all. The films, lacking this evidence, make the naming scene easier to swallow, more palatable to audiences seeking closure. But the literary Snape resists such simplicity. His cruelty to Hermione lingers as a reminder that redemption does not erase harm. The contrast between page and screen demonstrates how adaptations shape memory. For many viewers who know Snape only through Alan Rickman's performance, he becomes a tragic figure of unrequited love, a man whose cruelty is softened by melancholy. But readers of the books cannot forget the sting of his words to Hermione, the laughter at her expense, the withholding of praise. These moments do not make him irredeemable, but they complicate the narrative, showing that heroism and cruelty can inhabit the same man. In this complexity lies the darker truth. Snape's story is not about absolution, but about contradiction, and his treatment of Hermione is its sharpest proof. In the end, the Hermione of the books emerges scarred but strong, her intellect tested not only by spells and potions, but by the hostility of a professor who should have been her mentor. The films, by omitting this hostility, offer a cleaner image of both characters but rob the audience of the messier, truer lesson. The Snape, who sneered at Hermione's teeth and dismissed her intelligence, is harder to love but more honest. And the Hermione who endured him is not just clever but courageous. Number 20, cruelty toward Harry. Severus. Snape's image in the Harry Potter films has been carefully balanced to portray him as a dark but misunderstood figure, ultimately revealed to be a tragic hero. This softened representation is one of the major divergences from the books, where Snape's cruelty, particularly towards Harry, is far more severe, pointed, and relentless. While the movies hint at his disdain, they stop short of fully showing the depth of malice J.K. Rowling embedded in his actions. The cruelty is not subtle in the novels. It is deliberate, methodical, and often crosses the line from strict discipline to outright emotional abuse. Snape is not just a cold teacher with a grudge against James Potter's son. He is an adult who consistently lashes out at a child, wielding his authority as a weapon. From the very first potions class, Snape marks his territory. In the book Harry Potter and the Philosopher's Stone, he singles Harry out within minutes of their introduction in the dungeon classroom. His questions, such as asking Harry about the properties of asphodel and the use of bezoars, are designed not to test knowledge but to humiliate. Harry, who is new to the magical world, could not possibly know the answers. Snape knows this and exploits it. The narration makes this clear. Harry tried to remember what Snape had said about asphodel and wormwood, but it was impossible. He was clearly trying to humiliate him. The film adaptation of this scene presents Snape as cold and sharp-tongued, but not cruel beyond measure. The audience sees an unpleasant teacher, but not the full, humiliating weight of Snape's tactics, which Rowling writes with a precision that cuts both Harry and the reader. The films consistently soften these moments, reframing Snape's hostility as discipline. But in the books, Rowling shows Snape's cruelty extending into favoritism and injustice. He openly champions Slytherins while degrading Gryffindors, a practice that turns every classroom into a battlefield. In Chamber of Secrets, when Malfoy calls Hermione a mudblood, Snape's reaction is chilling. Instead of defending Hermione, a student subjected to a racial slur, Snape coldly explains the meaning of the insult, as though it is an academic curiosity. His refusal to punish Malfoy is an implicit endorsement of cruelty. The films present Snape as silent and unreadable in this moment, but the book reveals a teacher who refuses to defend a child against bigotry, furthering the sense of betrayal from someone entrusted with authority. Snape's treatment of Neville Longbottom is another window into his abusive tendencies. In the books, his ridicule of Neville is vicious and ongoing. The famous boggart scene in Prisoner of Azkaban is telling. Neville's greatest fear, his boggart, transforms into Snape himself. The revelation that a student fears his teacher above all else, even Voldemort's dark creatures, is damning. Dumbledore himself remarks that this should have been a red flag, though he does little about it. The film portrays the boggart scene as a comedic relief, with Neville dressing Snape in his grandmother's clothes. But in the novel, the moment is layered with tragedy. It is evidence of deep psychological torment inflicted over years. Snape is not merely feared because he is strict. He is feared because he humiliates and intimidates relentlessly. The books are clear that Snape is not beyond physical threats. In Order of the Phoenix, when Harry discovers his father's bullying of Snape during a memory in the Pensieve, Snape's reaction is not just anger, but violence. He corners Harry, shouting and throwing him out of his office with a ferocity that borders on unhinged. Get out! Get out! I don't want to see you in this office ever again." The feral energy of that moment reveals a man who cannot control his hatred, directing it at a 15-year-old boy who had no role in past events. The films tone this down, showing Snape as wounded and bitter, but not explosively violent. In doing so, they strip away the sense of danger Rowling infused into every encounter. One of Snape's most disturbing tendencies in the books is his deliberate undermining of Harry's confidence. Rowling repeatedly notes that Snape lowers Harry's marks regardless of the quality of his work. In Half-Blood Prince, Harry brews the draught of living death using the Half-Blood Prince's instructions, producing a flawless potion. Slughorn, impressed, rewards Harry. But the memory of Snape's constant deductions lingers. Earlier in the series, Snape would dock points, not for mistakes, but for arbitrary reasons. "You're breathing too loudly, Potter, 5 points from Gryffindor." These are not rules or discipline, they punishments for existing. The films, while hinting at this dynamic, do not commit to showing how systematic Snape's sabotage is, preferring instead to keep him in the shadows of mysterious authority. The cruelty extends to open threats. In Prisoner of Azkaban, Snape tells Harry, Ron, and Hermione, "If I hear you've come anywhere near here again, it'll be 1,000 detentions and you'll wish you hadn't been born." These words are not just strict warnings. They are psychological weapons. The violence of the phrase, "wish you hadn't been born," is not something a responsible teacher utters to children. Yet the films consistently avoid such lines, painting Snape as sharp but never sadistic. Rowling, however, wanted readers to feel the suffocating weight Harry endured under his authority. A constant reminder that Hogwarts was not a safe haven in every corridor. The rivalry with James Potter is used in the films as the central justification for Snape's bitterness. While this is accurate, it oversimplifies. In the books, Snape transfers his hatred of James directly onto Harry, using the boy as a proxy for revenge. He projects old wounds onto someone who has no responsibility for them. In Goblet of Fire, when Harry's name emerges from the goblet, Snape says with a sneer, "Fame clearly isn't enough for Potter. He must have another opportunity to show off." This is not a rational assessment. It is bitterness spilling into accusation. Harry, at 14, is accused of arrogance and cheating simply for being chosen by the goblet. The films tone this down, showing disapproval. Without the venom, the truth of the book Snape is that he weaponizes every situation to remind Harry that he is loathed. One of the sharpest examples of Snape's malice appears in Order of the Phoenix during Harry's occlumency lessons. Rather than teaching with patience or strategy, Snape uses the lessons as an opportunity to break Harry down. He attacks Harry's mind with such force that the boy is left shaken, vulnerable, and humiliated. Snape never explains the process clearly, never offers encouragement, and sneers at every failure. The novel reveals this as a deliberate act. Snape does not want Harry to succeed. He wants to remind him of his inadequacy. "You are weak, Potter, and you will always remain weak." This line crystallizes Snape's role as tormentor. In the film, the occlumency lessons are condensed, and while the tension is present, the emotional abuse is absent. The sense of Snape as an antagonist in Harry's own mind is lost. The public nature of Snape's cruelty is another detail the films dilute. In the books, Snape humiliates Harry in front of his peers again and again, robbing him of dignity. In Philosopher's Stone, he mocks Harry for his fame, suggesting that Potter's celebrity status cannot compensate for his incompetence. In Chamber of Secrets, he ridicules Harry's attempts at potion-making so mercilessly that other students laugh. Rowling makes it clear that Snape thrives on these displays. The classroom is not a place of learning under him. It is a stage where he performs his power. The films show brief moments of sarcasm but avoid the systemic bullying that Rowling describes. Snape's role during Quidditch matches is another instance of his hostility. In Philosopher's Stone, he referees a game specifically to watch Harry, not to protect him as the films suggest, but to keep him under scrutiny, suspicious and distrusted. Later, in Prisoner of Azkaban, when Harry sneaks into Hogsmeade, Snape threatens to expel him, not out of concern for safety, but with a kind of cold delight. Rowling emphasizes the venom. Snape enjoys the possibility of destroying Harry's future. The films, again, tone this down, framing his actions as gruff concern for rules rather than targeted malice. Perhaps the darkest illustration of Snape's nature is in Deathly Hallows, when Harry views the pensive memories. These scenes reveal Snape's tragic love for Lily, but they also expose the full weight of his bitterness. Snape's love does not absolve him of cruelty. It explains it. His protection of Harry was transactional, born from guilt and obsession with Lily rather than genuine care for the boy. Rowling ensures readers do not mistake Snape for a saint. He is a man of contradictions, one capable of great courage but also of deep malice. The films elevate his nobility, but the books remind us of the human cost of his choices, Harry, who endured years of unjust torment. The legacy of Snape's cruelty is clear in Harry's own reflections. Even after learning the truth, Harry admits Snape was the bravest man I ever knew. Yet bravery does not erase the scars of abuse. Rowling crafts a character who is morally grey, whose redemption comes at the price of a child's suffering. The films, eager to create a sympathetic, tragic figure, undercut this reality. They present Snape as misunderstood, not abusive. They soften the blow, perhaps to make the story more palatable, but in doing so they erase a vital truth about power, bitterness, and cruelty. The novels, taken in their full scope, remind readers that Snape was not a misunderstood mentor, but a deeply flawed man who often failed his responsibilities as a teacher. His protection of Harry was hidden behind layers of disdain, insults, and threats. His bravery in the end does not rewrite the cruelty of the years before. Rowling's Snape is a lesson in complexity, a hero perhaps, but also a villain, to a child who needed guidance. The films, by sanitizing this truth, alter not only Snape's character, but Harry's journey itself. Number 21. The Greatest Sacrifice. Severus. Snape's life is often remembered by film audiences through the narrow lens of his final moments, the heartbreaking scene in the Shrieking Shack where he dies after revealing his love for Lily Potter. The films craft him into a tragic hero, a double agent who redeems himself at the very end. Yet this is only the most superficial layer of his character. What the movies fail to capture is the long, excruciating sacrifice that defined his entire existence. His death was only the culmination of a much greater tragedy. Decades of loneliness, compromise, and the weight of a love that never brought him peace. The books reveal this far more clearly, painting a picture of a man who was trapped by his own mistakes, condemned to walk a path of constant suffering. It is this deeper sacrifice, the sacrifice of his very life's worth, that remains largely invisible in the cinematic adaptation. From the very beginning, Snape is shaped not by triumph, but by exclusion. At Hogwarts, he is ridiculed by James Potter and Sirius Black, mocked for his appearance and his social awkwardness. The films briefly gesture at these memories, but they never show the depth of humiliation described in the books. In Harry Potter and the Order of the Phoenix, Harry watches his father torment a 15-year-old Snape. James pulled out his wand, Levicorpus! Snape was hoisted into the air by his ankle, his robes falling over his head to reveal skinny, pallid legs. Rowling lingers on the cruelty of the scene, emphasizing that Lily Evans herself intervenes, ashamed of James's behavior. For Snape, this moment becomes an open wound. The humiliation was not just about being bullied, it was about losing dignity in front of the only person who had shown him genuine friendship. This shame drove him deeper into bitterness, sealing the sense of isolation that would later define his adult life. That one fracture, calling Lily a mudblood in a moment of desperation, becomes the pivot around which his destiny turns. The films acknowledge it only briefly, but the books underscore how this mistake devastates Snape. He apologizes, he begs forgiveness, but Lily cannot forget. The insult represents more than a word. It marks his growing involvement with future Death Eaters and the ideology that Lily despised. In the Deathly Hallows, Rowling makes clear that Snape's remorse never heals. "I am not such a coward," he tells Dumbledore when asked to protect Harry. "Kill me then. Kill me like you killed him, you coward." His entire adult life is shaped by the guilt of that one broken friendship. It was not only Lily's death that haunted him, but the knowledge that he had driven her away long before Voldemort ever raised his wand. The greatest irony of Snape's life is that his love for Lily condemned him to guard the very child who embodied both his deepest longing and his deepest resentment. In Harry, he saw Lily's eyes, her kindness, her fire. But he also saw James's face, the arrogance of the boy who had humiliated him. This duality explains the cruelty with which Snape often treated Harry, and it is far more nuanced in the books than the films suggest. Rowling does not excuse his bitterness, but she makes clear the psychological torment behind it. Dumbledore himself describes the paradox. He does not love you, he has never loved you, he loved your mother, that is all. To wake every day and see the ghost of the woman he adored tied inseparably to the man he hated most was a torment far greater than death. The films gesture at this conflict but smooth over its complexity, reducing it to a simple revelation in the final act. What the adaptations also obscure is the way Snape lived for decades as a man without genuine allies. He worked among colleagues who distrusted him. The students whispered about him, despising his strictness and cruel remarks. Even among the Death Eaters, he was never fully trusted. Snape existed in a perpetual state of suspicion, constantly performing loyalty to two masters. His only confidant was Dumbledore, and even that relationship was poisoned by manipulation and secrecy. In The Half-Blood Prince, when Dumbledore asks Snape to kill him to protect Draco Malfoy's soul, Snape protests, "You ask too much of me." It is a rare moment when Snape allows the crushing weight of his double life to surface. Yet he agrees because his role was to bear the unbearable. This is the sacrifice the films do not fully show. Not just the single act of killing Dumbledore, but the years of living without trust, without friendship, without relief. His bitterness towards students, especially those who reminded him of his own failures, further emphasized his exile from normal human connection. Neville Longbottom, with his clumsiness and lack of confidence, was one such victim. Snape's cruelty toward Neville is harsh, but in The Prisoner of Azkaban, the boggart scene reveals something startling. Neville's greatest fear is Snape himself. In a rare moment of humour, Lupin helps him transform Snape's image into something ridiculous. Yet for the reader, the deeper tragedy is clear. Snape has become so embittered that he terrifies children and in turn isolates himself. Further, this is not the portrait of a villain, nor of a simple hero, but of a man whose humanity has been eroded by the constant performance of roles he never wanted. Even his greatest moments of bravery are soaked in loneliness. When he delivers the sword of Gryffindor to Harry in the Forest of Dean, he does so silently without recognition. No thanks, no acknowledgement, only shadows. In the Deathly Hallows, we learn that Dumbledore trusted him with this task, but Harry never knew until much later. Snape's courage was always hidden, never celebrated, never rewarded. The films, with their dramatic pacing, present his bravery only in fragments, whereas the books highlight the relentless anonymity of his sacrifice. To live as a man whose good deeds must remain invisible is a torment few could bear. His relationship with Dumbledore itself was a source of torment, not comfort. Snape is manipulated into playing the role of executioner, into risking his soul again and again. Dumbledore insists this is necessary for the greater good, and Snape accepts, but at a terrible cost. In the Deathly Hallows, Snape cries out, "You have used me," when Dumbledore demands more of him, revealing his exhaustion with being treated as a tool. Yet even then, he does not turn away. He remains faithful, not because he believes in the mission fully, but because of Lily. His entire existence is reduced to honoring the memory of a love he could never possess. The films show this in a single flashback with the doe Patronus, but the books dwell on the depth of this devotion, the way it imprisoned Snape rather than liberating him. Perhaps the most devastating revelation about Snape's life is that he never truly lived for himself. Every choice, every sacrifice was made in service to Lily's memory or Dumbledore's strategy. He did not build friendships, he did not pursue joy, he did not seek redemption in any meaningful sense. He endured. He endured the sneers of students, the suspicion of colleagues, the hatred of Death Eaters, the manipulation of Dumbledore, and the contempt of Harry. The films present his death as his moment of redemption, but the books show that his life was already a death sentence long before Voldemort's snake struck. He was alive, but never truly living. In his final act, giving Harry his memories, Snape achieves a strange kind of immortality. Through the pensive, Harry finally sees him not as a cruel professor, but as a man torn apart by love and guilt. Yet even here, Snape receives no comfort. He dies alone on the floor of the shrieking shack, his last sight not of Lily but of Harry, the boy who reminded him daily of what he had lost. Rowling writes, "Look at me," whispered Snape. "The green eyes found the black." It is not a reconciliation, but a desperate attempt to see Lily's eyes one last time. The films reduce this to a poignant but brief moment, missing the full tragedy that Snape's final words embody. They are not about Harry at all. They are about Lily, and about the life Snape could never have. The true sacrifice of Severus Snape, then, is not simply that he died for Harry. It is that he lived for decades in a prison of his own making, bearing the weight of his mistakes, denied the basic joys of human connection. The films made him into a tragic figure in his death, but the books show him as a tragic figure in his life. He is the embodiment of endurance, of living with guilt so heavy that it erases every possibility of happiness. His legacy is not heroism in the conventional sense. It is the brutal reminder that some lives are defined not by victories, but by the willingness to carry unbearable burdens in silence. Number 22, magical talent. Severus Snape is often remembered in the films as the stern potions master who glides across the dungeons of Hogwarts, robes billowing, voice dripping with disdain. Yet, in the books, his true brilliance burns far brighter than cinema ever allowed. To reduce him to the image of a strict teacher obsessed with potion ingredients is to strip away the layers of his genius. In J.K. Rowling's text, Snape is revealed as one of the most versatile and creative wizards of his generation, a man whose talents went far beyond classroom lectures and cauldrons. The films left audiences with a one-dimensional picture, but the written word tells the story of a magician whose skills rivaled even those of Dumbledore's inner circle. One of the most telling examples of Snape's brilliance lies in the margins of an old textbook. The Half-Blood Prince's copy of Advanced Potion Making is not simply annotated, it is rewritten, improved, perfected. Snape did not merely follow instructions but reimagined them, cutting steps, adding insights, creating entirely new methods that produce potions more effective than those designed by professional authors. When Harry brews the draught of living death using Snape's instructions, Slughorn is astonished, awarding him the coveted vial of Felix Felicis. The moment reveals a truth. Snape was not a passive student of magic, but an inventor, one whose experimental mind redefined the boundaries of established wizardry. Yet it was not only potions where Snape demonstrated ingenuity. Hidden within those same margins were spells of his own creation. Sectum Sempra is perhaps the most famous, a curse designed with surgical precision, its incantation short, its effect devastating. But this was not an isolated act of invention. He also created spells like Levi Corpus, which caused victims to dangle upside down, and Muffliato, which filled nearby ears with buzzing to allow secret conversations. Rowling makes it clear that Snape was not simply learning magic, he was shaping it, expanding its lexicon, adding weapons and tools to the wizarding world that had not existed before. Films, however, reduce this entire achievement to a passing mention, never conveying to the audience that the teenager once mocked as snivellous was in fact a prodigy. To understand the scale of his mastery, one must look at disciplines where most wizards struggle to achieve even the basics. Occlumency and legilimency are among the rarest skills in the magical world. Few can block their minds against intrusion, and even fewer can penetrate another's defences with skill and subtlety. Snape excelled at both. Dumbledore himself acknowledged that Severus was the finest occlumens I have ever encountered. In the books, Snape stands as a fortress of secrecy, able to shield his mind from Lord Voldemort's piercing gaze, a feat nearly unthinkable. Even Albus, with all his wisdom, trusted no one more than Snape to perform this task. In the films, these moments are barely sketched, yet they are central to understanding his survival and his double life. Consider the moment in Harry Potter and the Order of the Phoenix when Snape attempts to teach Harry occlumency. The boy resents him, the lessons are failures, yet what lies behind the scenes is remarkable. Snape had spent years perfecting the ability to lock away his true allegiances, his memories, his guilt. He faced Voldemort, the greatest legilimens alive, and emerged unscathed. Rowling describes his skill with stark clarity. The mind is not a book to be opened at will and examined at leisure. It is a complex and many-layered thing. Snape did not merely master this complexity, he weaponized it. Without his command of occlumency, the Order of the Phoenix would have been exposed from within. The universality of Snape's talent is further evident in the trust Dumbledore placed in him. When discussing Voldemort's movements, Albus relied on Snape not only as a spy, but as an analyst of magical behavior. This was no ordinary teacher asked to provide intelligence. It was a recognition that Snape's grasp of the dark arts was unparalleled, that he could see patterns others missed, detect dangers others ignored. Dumbledore once remarked that Voldemort feared the unknown, the things he could not understand or control. Snape lived in that realm, mastering spells that blurred the line between light and darkness, between creation and destruction. The duel between Snape and the combined forces of McGonagall, Flitwick, and Sprout in the Deathly Hallows is another overlooked example. On the screen, the sequence is brief, but in the text, the implication is staggering. Snape fends off three of Hogwarts' most accomplished professors simultaneously. McGonagall, a transfiguration master, Flitwick, a former dueling champion, and Sprout, with her arsenal of magical plants, together could overwhelm nearly any opponent. Yet Snape deflects their attacks, maneuvers with calculated precision, and escapes without injury. The feat places him in the highest echelon of dueling wizards, alongside the likes of Dumbledore and Voldemort. The films deny him this recognition, treating him more as an obstacle than a force of equal measure. Even in subtler arts, Snape's mastery shone. He brewed Wolfsbane potion for Remus Lupin, a complex and dangerous concoction that few wizards in Britain could attempt. Slughorn himself admitted the potion was advanced stuff, requiring meticulous care. Yet Snape produced it regularly, ensuring Lupin's safety and control during full moons. This act, buried beneath layers of animosity between the two men, is evidence of professional competence far beyond routine teaching. The films reduce it to a line of dialogue, missing the deeper truth that only a wizard of extraordinary skill could provide such service consistently. What is most striking about the contrast between books and films is how Snape's abilities shape the destiny of others. Harry's victories often carried Snape's fingerprints. Without Snape's potion notes, Harry would never have succeeded in Slughorn's class, nor earned the trust of the professor whose memory was vital to defeating Voldemort. Without Snape's shield charms during the Battle of Hogwarts, students would have fallen under Death Eater curses. Rowling writes of him throwing protective spells in every direction, not for glory, but out of reflexive command of combat magic. None of this is shown on screen, yet it defines who Snape was, not just a teacher but a protector. Snape's relationship with dark arts also highlights his complexity. He was no mere practitioner of curses, but an expert in their anatomy. He understood how they functioned, how to defend against them, how to wield them without losing control. It was Snape, not anyone else, who created counter-curses and defensive strategies that allowed Dumbledore's army to endure. When Harry later uses Sectum Sempra, Snape is the only one capable of reversing its effects, muttering incantations and stemming the blood with fierce precision. This moment reveals both the danger of his inventions and the depth of his understanding. He was not a reckless experimenter, but a master who could command the balance between harm and healing. The brilliance of Snape lay not only in breadth, but in the precision of his intellect. He was capable of seeing flaws in established knowledge and correcting them. Potions recipes had stood for generations, yet Snape improved them as a student. Defense against the dark arts was taught by many, yet his methods were sharper, more rigorous, rooted in first-hand knowledge. Even Voldemort, who prided himself on his power, recognized Snape's value. The Dark Lord did not tolerate mediocrity in his inner circle, and Snape rose high not through fear, but through competence. He was both feared and respected, a man whose mind could outpace tradition. Alan Rickman's portrayal in the films gave Snape an unforgettable gravitas, but even his performance could not carry the full weight of what Rowling wrote. On screen, Snape is stern, sarcastic, bitter. In the text, he is all those things and more, a scholar, an innovator, a guardian of secrets, a man who moved with ease across the most difficult landscapes of magic. He belongs in the same conversation as Flitwick, McGonagall, and even Dumbledore, not as their lesser, but as their peer. The films allow glimpses of this truth, but never the whole picture. One cannot ignore the irony that Harry himself, the boy who despised Snape, benefited most from his talents. Harry's survival, his lessons, his very understanding of the magical world was shaped by a man he never appreciated until the final revelation. In Snape's memories, Harry discovers the genius hidden beneath cruelty, the discipline behind secrecy, the love that powered sacrifice. Rowling's narrative demands readers look again at every sneer, every punishment, and see in them the shadow of brilliance. The films, for all their power, let this depth slip through their fingers. The essence of Severus Snape lies not in potions alone, but in the universality of his magic. He was inventor, duelist, spy, and teacher, a wizard who could stand among the greatest without faltering. The books paint him as a man of vast ability, misunderstood and concealed behind bitterness, yet vital to the balance between light and darkness. To see him only as a potion maker is to misunderstand the architecture of his character. Severus Snape was a master of many arts, a magician whose gifts were as wide as they were dangerous, and whose story is one of the most complex ever written in Rowling's world. Number 23. His cruel tongue. In the dim corridors of Hogwarts as described in the books, Severus Snape was not merely cold, he was razor-sharp, with a tongue that cut deeper than any curse. Readers were not left with the impression of a quiet, controlled teacher, but of a man who wielded sarcasm like a sword. The films portrayed him as someone who spoke little, often pausing dramatically before delivering a dry insult. Yet in the novels, Snape's words carried an energy that humiliated, embarrassed, and pierced the very core of his students' self-esteem. This difference is not subtle, it reshapes how audiences understand him. The cinematic Snape, played with elegance by Alan Rickman, could even appear tragically noble. The book Snape, however, was terrifyingly cruel, and his cruelty was often verbal. One of the most striking moments comes early in Harry Potter and the Philosopher's Stone. In Harry's very first potions class, Snape does not simply sneer at him. He unleashes a barrage of rhetorical questions meant to ridicule the boy in front of everyone. What would I get if I added powdered root of asphodel to an infusion of wormwood? Snape asks. Harry, of course, has no idea. The classroom fills with tension as Snape continues. Clearly, fame isn't everything. The reader feels the sting of these words because they are designed not only to expose Harry's ignorance but to make him appear foolish before his classmates. On the page, Snape does not whisper his contempt, he delivers it like poison, sharp and precise. In the film, this scene is shortened and Snape's tone is calm, almost weary. The book, however, reveals a man determined to humiliate. Snape's language is not merely sarcastic, it is weaponized. For instance, when Neville Longbottom accidentally ruins a potion in The Prisoner of Azkaban, Snape's words are devastating. He does not scold in a measured way. He declares to the entire class, "Why don't you try and poison him with it, Longbottom?" referring to Trevor the Toad. The cruelty is not hidden. It is not a passing remark. It is a deliberate attempt to make Neville feel worthless. In the films, Snape may raise an eyebrow or give a cold comment, but he never savors humiliation in the same way. Readers of the novels remember these moments vividly because the cruelty was not a background detail. It was the essence of his teaching, Hermione Granger, one of the brightest students at Hogwarts, was not immune to Snape's viciousness. In the Chamber of Secrets, when Hermione eagerly answers a question, Snape snaps, "You're an insufferable know-it-all." The word insufferable is not neutral. It carries the weight of disdain. A teacher cutting down a child for her intelligence is shocking, and Rowling ensures we feel the injustice. Other students laugh not because the insult is funny, but because it is safer to laugh than to be the next target. The film adaptation softens this cruelty. Alan Rickman's Snape mutters the line with a touch of dry wit, making it more amusing than devastating. Yet in the book, Hermione blushes, wounded. The difference changes how we perceive Snape entirely. Harry himself bore the brunt of this constant verbal assault. In the Order of the Phoenix, Snape mocks Harry's emotional vulnerability during occlumency lessons. "Fools who wear their hearts proudly on their sleeves," he hisses, "cannot understand what it means to hide." The tone in the novel is scalding. Snape is not merely instructing, he is demeaning Harry's very identity. He cuts into Harry's grief, into his need for connection, and belittles it. On screen, this becomes a sequence of cold stares and brisk orders. The film loses the venom of the words, leaving only the sense of strictness. What is missing is the humiliation Harry feels every time Snape speaks. It is easy to see why film adaptations chose restraint. Alan Rickman's performance carved Snape into a mysterious, tragic figure. His minimal speech, elongated pauses, and controlled delivery gave him an aura of power. But this restraint strips away the most disturbing element of book Snape, his delight in verbal cruelty. Rowling shows us a teacher who seems to enjoy watching children squirm. A single sentence from Snape could turn triumph into shame, excitement into fear. The films could not fully embrace this, perhaps because it risked making him irredeemable in the eyes of movie audiences, yet the books never flinch. Consider the way Snape treated Ron Weasley. In The Philosopher's Stone, when Ron tries to defend Harry in potions, Snape slams him down with venom. "Tell me, Weasley, are you incapable of forming coherent sentences unless you're insulting someone?" The insult is aimed not only at Ron's defense of his friend, but at his intelligence. For a boy already insecure about his worth compared to his siblings, Snape's words are salt in the wound. This side of him barely appears in the films. Cinematic Ron suffers embarrassment from his own mistakes, not from Snape's piercing tongue. The book, however, shows us how Snape actively cultivated that shame. The cruelty extends even to the moments of crisis. When Harry is found with evidence related to Sirius Black in The Prisoner of Azkaban, Snape does not simply accuse. He lashes out with words designed to cut to the core. "You've been taught how to behave, Potter, but you have been too arrogant to learn." The word arrogant echoes the way Snape always links Harry to James Potter. It is not just an insult, it is an accusation of inherited sin. On film, the moment is more muted, giving Snape the role of a stern investigator. In the book, the personal venom drips from every word. Snape's cruelty was not evenly distributed. He favored Draco Malfoy, who thrived under his protection. Yet this favoritism only sharpened the contrast for students like Neville, Harry, and Hermione. In The Goblet of Fire, when Hermione's teeth are cursed to grow uncontrollably, Snape's reaction is chilling. He tells her, "I see no difference." It is a line soaked in malice, attacking her appearance, her humanity, her dignity. This moment is absent from the film, yet it demonstrates why Book Snape was feared. He could attack a child in her most vulnerable moment and call it teaching. The films tried to create a balance between Snape's cruelty and his hidden nobility. His moments of sacrifice, his love for Lily, and his double life as a spy needed to shine through. But in doing so, they dulled the edge of his tongue. The book, Snape was no tragic hero while alive. He was the nightmare of every classroom, a teacher who used language as a whip. When we read his insults, we do not feel clever amusement. We feel sympathy for the children enduring them. His words sting across the page in a way the camera never fully captured. Even Harry's friends saw the damage. In the Order of the Phoenix, when Snape insults Harry's father, calling James exceedingly arrogant, the wound deepens. Harry is left torn between his resentment and his desperate need to defend his father's memory. Snape exploits that conflict deliberately. The film reduces this to a simple flashback and a few harsh words, but the novel drags the reader through Harry's humiliation. Snape knew where to cut, and he cut deeply. Snape's language was also laced with bitterness toward his own life. Every insult he delivered to Harry or Neville was shadowed by his resentment of James Potter and Sirius Black. His cruel words were not simply about poor schoolwork, they were echoes of an unresolved past. Rowling made sure we felt the weight of that bitterness in every sarcastic barb. In the films, that backstory is present, but his voice does not drip with the same venom. His words in the novels feel like old wounds being opened again and again, passed down from teacher to student. This difference has shaped generations of fans. Readers who grew up with the books remember Snape as a dangerous, unpleasant man whose redemption was shocking precisely because it was so unlikely. Moviegoers, however, often saw him as a tragic anti-hero from the beginning, thanks in part to the elegance of Alan Rickman's performance. The sharpness of his language, which in the books was as much a weapon as a wand, was lost in translation. What remained was a shadow, a controlled version, stripped of its most venomous qualities. To understand Snape fully, one must return to the books, where his sarcasm is not dry wit, but cruelty wielded with precision. He was a man who could, with a single phrase, make Hermione wish she had not spoken, reduce Neville to trembling silence, and remind Harry every day of the weight of his father's legacy. This was the Snape who haunted Hogwarts, not merely the cold figure of the films. His words were daggers, and Rowling ensured we felt each cut. Number 24. Hatred of the Marauders. Severus. Snape's past is one of the most complicated threads woven into J.K. Rowling's books, but when the story made its way to the big screen, much of the bitterness that defined his character was smoothed over. In the novels, Snape's hatred of James Potter, Sirius Black, and the Marauders as a whole was not a fleeting emotion born of a single act of schoolyard bullying. It was a deep, lifelong scar, a shadow that followed him long after he'd left Hogwarts. The films gave us a fleeting glimpse, the infamous Snape's worst memory scene, but it was presented almost like a single childhood incident rather than a defining trauma that controlled his worldview. To truly understand Snape, one must return to the pages where Rowling repeatedly reminds us that he never stopped hating those boys, not as a professor, not even decades later when their children entered his classroom. The animosity between Snape and James Potter was not a surface rivalry, the kind that dissolves after graduation. The books describe how Snape carried his loathing into adulthood, treating Harry as if he were the ghost of James himself. In Harry Potter and the Philosopher's Stone, from the moment Harry sits down at the sorting feast, Snape's eyes bore into him with a look of loathing. The boy had done nothing to him, but Snape saw James in the tilt of Harry's head, in the disobedient black hair, and that resemblance was enough to ignite old grudges. The film simplified this to a sharp but restrained dislike, a sneer here and there. but they never let the viewer feel the decades of poisonous resentment pulsing beneath the surface. The book Snape, however, was obsessed with his past. It is telling that Rowling chose to reveal Snape's memory of being humiliated by James in front of the entire school as the worst moment of his life. That is not a casual detail. In Order of the Phoenix, when Harry accidentally peers into Snape's memory during occlumency lessons, he discovers a teenage Severus being dangled upside down, his underwear exposed, while James laughs and Sirius watches. The shame is so potent that Snape cannot bear Harry seeing it. "Get out!" he roars, hurling Harry out of the pensive. The trauma of that moment had lived in him for over 20 years, and his fury is directed not only at James, but at Harry, who was guilty of nothing but looking. The films reproduced the visual humiliation, but failed to capture its weight. This was not just bullying, this was the seed of a lifelong obsession, one that defined Snape's bitterness and his treatment of others. Rowling never let the reader forget how that obsession shaped Snape's personality. He was not a man who forgave, nor was he capable of detaching the sins of the father from the innocence of the son. In Prisoner of Azkaban, his rage at Harry and his friends is intensified when Sirius Black escapes Azkaban. Snape nearly foams with hatred when he confronts Sirius in the Shrieking Shack, hissing, Give me a reason to do it, and I swear I will." The scene is electric with personal history. Snape is not just confronting an escaped convict. He is reliving years of humiliation, years of being mocked as the greasy outsider, and he finally has his tormentor cornered. The films present this moment, but Alan Rickman's delivery, as brilliant as it is, does not convey the extent to which Snape's hatred had festered for decades. The book makes it clear that Snape is nearly irrational with fury, blind to the actual facts of Sirius's innocence. The children of the Marauders bore the brunt of this venom. Harry was the most obvious target, but Snape's treatment of Neville Longbottom is equally revealing. In Philosopher's Stone, Snape sneers that Neville is the class idiot, and in Prisoner of Azkaban he cruelly remarks that it would be an improvement if Neville were poisoned. What could Neville, shy and bumbling, possibly have done to earn such malice? Nothing, except that he belonged to the same Gryffindor house as James and Sirius. Snape's hatred was not logical. It was a blanket of contempt that suffocated anyone associated with his schoolboy enemies. The films reduced this to sardonic cruelty, almost comic in tone, but the books leave no doubt Snape's bitterness had curdled into something dark, unfair, and consuming. This deep-seated grudge also poisoned his relationships with colleagues. In Order of the Phoenix, Snape and Sirius's exchanges in Grimmauld Place are barbed and vicious. Sirius calls him a coward, and Snape retorts that Sirius hid behind his mother's skirts after Azkaban. The two men, grown and supposedly allies in the war against Voldemort, cannot stop bickering like adolescents because their schoolyard resentments have never healed. Dumbledore tolerates their hostility, but never erases it. The films touched on this tension briefly, but they glossed over how pervasive and destructive it was. The books paint Snape as a man who could not, even for the sake of the Order, let go of his hatred. Another telling example is Snape's reaction when Lupin joins the Hogwarts staff as defense against the dark arts professor in Prisoner of Azkaban. Snape immediately begins leaking information about Lupin's condition, accidentally letting slip that Lupin had a fondness for certain chocolate and dropping hints about his mysterious absences. He even sets an essay assignment designed to expose Lupin's identity as a werewolf. Why? Because Lupin was part of the Marauder Circle, one of James's companions, and Snape could not resist the chance to humiliate him. It was not enough that decades had passed. To Snape, the old war was still alive. The film version of this subplot was almost entirely absent, depriving viewers of an essential insight. Snape was not just cruel to Harry, he was locked in an endless vendetta against all who reminded him of his youth. The intensity of Snape's resentment is sharpened when compared to how the Marauders themselves behaved as adults. Lupin, for instance, displays regret for their cruelty. In Order of the Phoenix, he admits to Harry, "What you saw last year was the worst of James." Sirius, though still arrogant, acknowledges James's flaws, but Snape never reaches such a moment of reflection. For him, the past is frozen in time, and James remains forever the arrogant boy who humiliated him. This lack of emotional growth is crucial to his character. The films, in softening his image into a brooding, tragic figure, missed the fact that Snape was also a man consumed by grudges, incapable of healing. Even Dumbledore recognized the intensity of Snape's bitterness. In Half-Blood Prince, when discussing Harry's safety, Dumbledore admits that Snape has a habit of holding grudges. This is a polite understatement, but it reveals that even the wise headmaster saw how corrosive Snape's hatred was. Yet the films present Snape's loyalty to Dumbledore as clear-cut, almost noble, without emphasizing how much of it was twisted by personal vendettas. In the books, his service is laced with contradictions. He protects Harry because of Lily, but despises him because of James. He fights for the Order, but undermines Sirius and Lupin. These contradictions make him complex, but they also make him deeply flawed. The lingering hatred is visible even in subtle details. In Goblet of Fire, when Harry is chosen as a Triwizard Champion, Snape's reaction is not one of concern but of cold suspicion, muttering that Harry must have found a way to cheat, just like his father would have. The remark is not just unfair, it shows how Snape filters every event through the lens of James Potter. Harry cannot win or suffer without it somehow becoming a reflection of his father's supposed arrogance. The films largely strip away this nuance, portraying Snape as exasperated but not obsessed, and in doing so they dilute the very core of his resentment. What makes Snape's fixation so tragic is that it robs him of the chance to build meaningful relationships. His role as Harry's protector is poisoned by his inability to see Harry as himself. When he saves Harry from Quirrell's curse in Philosopher's Stone, or when he hurls him out of the path of Lupin's werewolf in Prisoner of Azkaban, his actions are heroic, but his words remain venomous. He cannot tell Harry the truth, nor can he admit to himself that he sees Lily's eyes in the boy. Instead, he clings to James's shadow. This complexity is muted in the films, where his moments of protection overshadow the cruelty that defines their everyday interactions. Rowling's writing ensures the reader feels the oppressive weight of Snape's bitterness. In Order of the Phoenix, Harry reflects after occlumency lessons that Snape hated him just as much as ever, and the reader senses the futility of any reconciliation. There is no catharsis, no moment where the two reach understanding. Even when Snape gives Harry his memories in Deathly Hallows, it is not forgiveness that shines through, but a final desperate act motivated by love for Lily and hatred for Voldemort. The Marauders still linger in those memories, and the bitterness has never died. The films turn this into a scene of redemption, painting Snape as purely tragic, but the books insist he remained a man chained to his past. Snape's vendetta against the Marauders is ultimately a lesson in the destructive power of unresolved trauma. He was brilliant, brave, and capable of love, but he was also embittered, unfair, and sometimes cruel. By softening this aspect in the films, the cinematic Snape becomes more sympathetic, but less real. The book Snape was not a man audiences were meant to like easily. He was a man they were meant to understand in all his contradictions. The hatred he carried for James, Sirius, and their friends was not a subplot. It was a central, corrosive element of his life, one that shaped his choices, his teaching, his alliances, and his death. Number 25, his true loyalty. Severus Snape in the films is remembered as the dark, brooding professor who carried a torch for Lily Evans and redeemed himself at the end by revealing his love had guided him all along. Yet when one turns to the pages of J.K. Rowling's books, the narrative surrounding him is not so neatly tied together. In truth, his loyalty to Dumbledore was a coerced allegiance, grounded in guilt, a binding, unbreakable vow, and the crushing weight of responsibility for the death of Lily. The movies distill his complexity into a single, redemptive arc where love makes him noble. The novels insist otherwise. Snape's love was obsessive, distorted, and tragically self-destructive, tethered not to the greater good, not to Harry, not even to the Order of the Phoenix, but solely to the memory of the woman he lost. Everything else, his role as spy, teacher, or protector, was a facade serving that hidden shrine within his heart. When Voldemort resolved to kill the Potters, Snape's panic revealed the truth of his loyalties. He begged Dumbledore to protect Lily, showing no concern for James or for the infant Harry. His desperate plea, "Hide them all then, hide her, keep her, the child doesn't matter, James doesn't matter," from Harry Potter and the Deathly Hallows makes explicit that his love did not translate into broader compassion. It was Lily, and Lily alone, who anchored him. The films gloss over this moment, suggesting Snape's entire allegiance to Dumbledore emerged from some profound shift in morality. But Rowling writes him as a man cornered by his own sins, who came to Dumbledore not with a desire to join the light, but with a selfish hope to save the woman he adored. From that moment, Snape's life became a prison of his own making. He could not undo the choice that had set Voldemort on Lily's path, and so he chained himself to Dumbledore's service. The headmaster exploited his guilt and bound him with secrecy, ensuring Snape would never again have the luxury of neutrality. In the films, this appears as voluntary bravery. In the books, it reads as penance. His protection of Harry was less about affection for the boy than a bitter consequence of his vow to safeguard Lily's child. Snape himself expressed this resentment. "You have kept him alive so that he can die at the right moment? You have used me?" Words he hurled at Dumbledore when the truth of Harry's role as a sacrificial lamb emerged. In that fury lies the truth. Snape did not serve willingly for the sake of a noble cause. He served because Lily's death demanded it, and because Dumbledore knew how to harness that wound. One of the sharpest distortions of Snape's image in the films is how his cruelty toward Harry is softened. The books are unrelenting in showing Snape's disdain. He taunts Harry about his fame, mocks Neville Longbottom to the point of humiliation, and uses his power as a teacher to instill fear rather than learning. The moment in The Prisoner of Azkaban when he accuses Harry of arrogance simply for walking the castle grounds is one of many where his bitterness eclipses reason. This was not the behavior of a mentor protecting a boy in the shadows, but of a man incapable of separating his hatred of James Potter from the innocent child left behind. His love for Lily did not extend to kindness toward her son. It manifested only as a begrudging shield. The irony is that Snape's greatest act of bravery, the killing of Albus Dumbledore, was not born out of loyalty to Voldemort or the Order, but out of another coerced promise. Bound by the unbreakable vow he made with Narcissa Malfoy, Snape had no choice but to agree to kill Dumbledore should Draco fail. Yet Dumbledore himself demanded it, seeing his death as a way to protect Draco's soul and preserve Snape's place within Voldemort's ranks. In The Half-Blood Prince, this scene is described with quiet tragedy. Severus, please. The films present this as a decisive, almost heroic moment, where Snape steps forward as if reclaiming power, but in truth, Snape is cornered by obligations and manipulation, performing the final act in a long play written by others. His so-called loyalty to Dumbledore was never freely given. It was forced by circumstance and by the vows that chained him. This distortion is critical because it changes the perception of Snape's tragedy. On screen, he is painted as a man who willingly devoted his life to the side of good, who bore the weight of scorn and hatred so that he might protect Harry. But in Rowling's text, he is a man enslaved to guilt, whose every act of protection was a twisted echo of his love for Lily. When he shields Harry from harm, he does so not because he values Harry as a person, but because he cannot let Lily's sacrifice be in vain. His famous Patronus, the Silver Doe, captures this truth with devastating clarity. When Dumbledore asks, "After all this time?" Snape responds, "Always." That word has been immortalized as a symbol of eternal love, but beneath its romance lies obsession, an unending refusal to move on, to live beyond the ghost of Lily Evans. The novels make no effort to sanitize the consequences of this obsession. Snape's entire life is stunted, emotionally frozen in adolescence, as though the night of Lily's death locked him forever into mourning. He is incapable of forming healthy relationships. His interactions with other teachers are cold, his treatment of students brutal, his loyalty perpetually suspect. He exists in the margins, a man driven only by grief and guilt. The films, by turning him into a figure of romantic sacrifice, miss the darker truth. Snape is not simply a hero misunderstood, but a tragic figure who could never rise beyond his flaws. Even his membership in the Order of the Phoenix is painted with false nobility in the films. In the books, he is constantly distrusted, doubted, and loathed by his supposed allies. Sirius Black mocks him openly, Remus Lupin avoids him, and the Weasleys regard him with contempt. He is tolerated, not embraced, and he endures this, not for the Order's mission, but because Dumbledore holds him in place. His loyalty to the Order is transactional. His heart is buried elsewhere. To imagine Snape as a secret champion of resistance is to erase the depth of his isolation. He was never truly one of them. One sees this again in the way he governs Hogwarts under Voldemort's regime. The films show him as a stoic, silent headmaster, biding time until he can reveal his true allegiance. The books tell a harsher story. Snape permits the Carrows, sadistic Death Eaters, to torture students, and while he occasionally intervenes to mitigate the worst cruelties, he does not prevent the reign of terror. This is not the picture of a man working tirelessly for the safety of children. It is the picture of someone trapped in his role, unable to rebel openly, surviving only by adhering to his double life. His protection of Harry's generation was selective, inconsistent, and always subordinated to the secrecy of his mission.